Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Rica Facundo, Managing Editor of WARC APAC. Today, we are discussing the evolution of e-commerce in Asia, its role in enabling growth, and how to build brands in an environment that has famously or infamously encouraged a race to the bottom and created a more competitive landscape for brands. Joining me today is Magnus Ekbom, co-founder of Lazada, a major marketplace in Asia, and is now Group CEO of SEI, an e-commerce enabler. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Do you have brand new research, groundbreaking insight, or an outstanding brand story that the industry needs to hear? Good news, Cannes Lions is now inviting on-stage content applications for the festival in June 2026. This is your chance to make history by speaking on the most coveted stage in the creative industry. You pitch the topic, speakers, session format, and more. Cannes Lions brings together inspiration from every corner of the creative marketing community. This is your chance to be a part of it. The deadline for submissions is 31st of December 2025. To submit your idea, visit canneslions.com.
Hey, Magnus, welcome to the WARC Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
All right, so I just want to set the scene first for our global audience who might not be familiar with Lazada or the e-commerce landscape here. Can you talk a little bit about that as well as how you see e-commerce kind of enabling growth in the region?
Well, those are one simple and two big questions. But if you look at e-commerce and our region, the starting point for myself, but I would say also for the ecosystem in a broader sense, around 2010, 12 is a good time to start. That's when I came to the region, and I was a part of the team that founded Lazada, which was at least one of the first regional marketplaces for Southeast Asia. I mean, Asia is a it's one of these things like we have North Asia, we have China, we have Southeast Asia, each distinct, but Southeast Asia is home to one of the most digitally active populations anywhere in the world. And this is something that strikes people when they come to spend time and visit, that when you look at sort of how early social media was adopted, there's like these, simple stats that I think Meta had a office of 2 people in Indonesia while having over 100 million users in the country already 10 years ago. So that gives you a sense of just where we are and in many ways how far we've come.
I can't believe that was 10 years ago.
Time flies. But it's like now it's, everyone is here and it's...
Exactly, and marketplaces are such a key component.
Absolutely.
Since I have you and you're the co-founder of Lazada, there's a question I always get asked. I'm going to ask it to you. Southeast Asia is always stuck in between the West and China in terms of dynamics and whatnot. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the dynamics here, maybe what people often get wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we are between the East and the West, but I think in a good way. And if you look at sort of the historical influences on this region, I think that there is a very deep both ethnic, cultural, and sort of just connection to China. I think like when you look at the historical trade routes, how people have moved and sort of where people have their descendancy from, it doesn't matter to which country in Southeast Asia you come. There is a strong Chinese connection without any doubt. But that's only one thread of history, if you will. When you look especially more recently, the West in a broader sense, but I mean we are here in Singapore. It's a former British colony. Same was true for Malaysia and other parts of the region. But I think this duality is really what makes the region so unique. And you see that I think we are pretty good at taking a little bit the best of both worlds. I think that we have sort of the Western, if you will, rigor and predictability, but also sort of the more, if we take then Chinese sort of thirst for innovation, pushing boundaries and pushing barriers. And if I were to say like where has there been most innovation coming out in the last decade and a half, without any doubt, it's China. I think that this is something that we just sort of see past that. American tech companies have done a phenomenal job in globalizing their products and their offerings, no question about it. But when you look at sort of where they are getting a lot of their, if you will, inspiration or just innovation from, look to the mainland. That's where you found many of the answers.
I want to talk a little bit about the growth aspect of what the infrastructure you're talking about is enabling. I'm based in Singapore. It's been really fascinating to see some of kind of the regional infrastructure that's really enabling that cross-border exchange. And of course, Asia is infamous for being fragmented. So what has your experience, both at Lazada, now you're at SCI,
Sure.
which is an e-commerce enabler, taught you about, what does brand building look like in this kind of new era of cross-border exchange with platforms and infrastructures like the ones that you've been part of help
Sure.
enable?
I mean, I think that there is definitely, I was picking up on the thing you said that Asia is so fragmented. I mean, Southeast Asia is home to 550 give and take million people. It's about the same as the European Union. Here we have sort of 5, 6 countries. I think fragmentation can be looked at in different ways. But what is very true is that each market, each country is very unique in its own sense. And I think this is something that anyone who wants to build a brand has to take to heart. That I don't think there is such a thing as an Asian strategy. There is not even such a thing as a Southeast Asian strategy. You need to be on the ground, connecting to the community, which I think is a very, very important word in each of the countries. If you look sort of around us here in Southeast Asia, but also beyond, and this region. The APAC in a broader sense, but we spoke earlier about the influences that there is so much cross-border influences coming in. I think this is true for how products move. That we have China next door, which produces the vast majority, especially when we talk about consumer goods and so forth. China is the manufacturer of the world. There is no doubt about that. Even with everything that's happened in the last year and a half or whatever, it's not going to change anytime soon. We have that as one of the defaults. But also when you look at the cultural influences, there is again this duality. It's not just a historical thing. It's right here and now that we have both influences from China. You can see it in sort of the range of everything from coffee shops and drink preferences to which brands we aspire to. But I would also sort of pick up on the changes in the sense that over the past 30 or so years, definitely we've had Western brands on the shelves in most of sort of the retail stores across our region. But where e-commerce really has changed the landscape is that now the storefront and the shelf is digital, which means that it can change much, much more rapidly. And this is again where I think when you take sort of a Western and American lens, like one of the sort of facets of e-commerce is that when you look at kind of metrics such as what's the square footage of retail space per capita or whatever you want to put it, Asia is so much lower than anywhere in the Western world. And the difference that in the West is that e-commerce was sort of a supplement, it was an addition, it was a little bit of a disruptor, but in Asia there wasn't that much to disrupt to begin with, which meant that e-commerce has taken a completely different role. And if you look sort of as a share of retail in China, we are already past 50% of retail that goes online. Southeast Asia is a bit behind, but it's sort of trending on a very, very clear trajectory in terms of its importance. And this is something that has transformed how brands are being, or how fast brands can be created, how fast they can garner relevance, because it's not just sort of that the retailers, they've had the same supplier relationships for the past decades and they're going to keep carrying the same products. No, like if you want to buy sneakers, in when I go back to, I mean, I'm European or Swedish, right? So like I know which brands I will find on the shelf. It's the sort of the two European ones plus a few more. If I go around on sort of any online interface here in Asia or for that matter many, because this also propagates into the offline retail landscape, like you will find 50, 60 brands that many of them you've never heard of before. And personally, I think it's fantastic, but it's also a challenge for marketers.
That's a good segue to talk about the digital shelf. And you talked about the influence from, both parts of the world, but specifically I want to pick up maybe what we've adopted really from the Chinese mindset, which is kind of this environment of promotions and discounts. I mean, I think you admitted it yourself that, Lazada created that environment where it was cashback culture.
I think we did. Yeah, we did.
it was interesting because at a recent Google summit, there was a data point from BCG and Google that showed that the average promotional spend versus advertising for e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia was 2.6 to 4.5 times higher. This increases to 6.3 times to 7.4 times for delivery platforms. And you responded, hey, actually, that's not good practice. That overweight is not normal. So for those who weren't at the summit, can you explain to our audience what you meant by that?
For sure. And I think there were, first of all, these data points, they should always be looked at in context, but they give a sense. And I think it's very fair to say that Asia and Southeast Asia has over-indexed on promotion over the past decade. There are two things I would sort of pick up on in this. First of all, why? Why is that the case? And when I say like as sort of early builders in the digital ecosystem, the challenge that we were faced with is that we have a very low penetration of the user or customer base. And then we ask ourselves, how do we get more people to try buying online? How do we sort of lower that barrier to entry? And there were many things that we did. One of them was, yes, we sort of over-indexed in addition to sort of those of, plenty of marketing investment, but we try to make it easy to make that first order, to place that first order. But it was also when you look at things like how did we make it possible for users and consumers to pay for their products. Cash on delivery was this sort of thing that we sometimes see past. But if you want to look at the single biggest lever for conversion rate improvements, cash on delivery in the last 10 years, hands down, without any question, extremely important to make it easy. Today, we are transitioning step by step towards digital payments, which I believe is good. It's right. It will continue. But we need to also remember sort of some of these enablers. But again, we were trying to get more consumers to become a part of the online, the active buyers in the e-commerce space. That's the first thing. The second thing is then, why has it continued? And that's where I think it gets more interesting, because in 2015, I think I quoted some figure that we had out of the, say, 350 million people or so that are active online in Southeast Asia, in the semi-adult population, I think we should add, we had maybe 50 million that were buying online, e-commerce customers. And our challenge was, how do we grow that number? And that's what we did. Today, I think we can safely say that at least 70-80% of the people who are active online in Southeast Asia are also active e-commerce buyers, maybe even more. And that kind of begs the question, do we really have a penetration problem in terms of getting people to buy online? No, we don't. I think this is where many of the consumer engagement mechanisms that we developed and that I think, have created legacies. We have the double-digit campaigns. When we first started with Double 12 was the first one that sort of came. I mean, there's a long history we can talk about for that as well. But I think that they have, to be honest, outlived their purpose. I think they're still good to have some, shopping festival. It's not a bad thing, but you don't need them every single month. So then it becomes sort of, twice. I mean, like it becomes, it's not good for anyone. And I think this is where I sort of coin a bit that this is just lazy marketing strategy. But this is also where, again, the measurement aspect becomes so crucial, because the thing with conversion rate and sort of marketing efficiency, it's sort of very much two sides of the same coin. And what tends to drive conversion rate also shows up as high performing marketing. But then we need to ask ourselves, why is the product converting in the first place? And if it's converting because of discounts, that's again not good. And I think this is where to be diligent and studious in sort of how we actually look at our numbers is so fundamental. And this is where I think that the analytics and the creative side, like it has to sort of come together, and there needs to be a reassessment of what is really the marketing strategies that we deploy. So I'm not saying that what we did 10 years ago was wrong. I don't think it was. I think it took us to where we are today, but that doesn't mean that what we should be doing going forward is the same thing. The strategy that got us here is not going to get us to where we need to go. And I think that's the mindset that we have to anchor.
I mean, context is always very important, right? Again, 10 years ago, I can't believe it was 10 years ago, these user behaviors didn't exist, right? So, to be fair, discount codes is is an easy way to get people to enable behaviors, right? But then now we're in a very different problem or different landscape. And you said earlier it was about a penetration problem. What's the problem today? Not just for you, but even when you speak to different brands and leaders in this space, like what's the new problem that they're
For
thinking
sure,
about
for
now?
sure. I mean, when you look at sort of the great thing that we spoke about, the digital shelf and sort of how easy in a way it is to launch a brand, because it is quite easy to launch a brand. To build a brand and to sustain a brand is a whole different challenge altogether. And I think that what many uh, entrepreneurs, brand owners, or brand managers in a larger company, what they are faced with is sort of how do we stay relevant, both in terms of building, you know, I don't like sort of these terms like customer acquisition. We don't acquire a customer. We get to be a part of the customer's mind space for a defined period of time, as long as we stay relevant to them. And I think this is sort of where we need to constantly, in a way, then reacquire that trust and the loyalty that we have from our user base. And when you look at that across different channels, in the sense that e-commerce, we tend to think of it as a static, market where like you have the big platforms and the big leaders. I would say true and not true. Over the past sort of 5-10 years, we've seen multiple evolutions. One is where you had sort of big platforms are the leaders in Asia. I think that's true. They command 80+% of the market. But amongst them, you had sort of first here in Southeast Asia, you had Lazada was the dominant platform, 70% market share. Then you had Shopee coming up and sort of displacing Lazada. Then you had TikTok coming up and sort of gaining share in ways that no one really expected, just how quickly it would happen. And all of them bring about new challenges where you have slightly different demographics. You need to sort of go to market with a different packaging, a different offering. Now we are sort of entering a new phase, one way or the other, where chatbots and sort of distributed commerce, and maybe even I don't know if it's going to be headless or whatnot. But let's just agree that the disruption will continue, and I think that this is sort of where, as a brand leader and a brand manager, that's sort of, the brand has never been more important. And yet I think it's getting less and less, space in the debate, because when you look at also e-commerce, a lot of products have been kind of unbranded. Like, it's been very quick and we buy, something that's quite commoditized. And this is again where I believe that the combination of like marketing in some ways, I guess, kind of needs to go back to its roots. Like we need to connect to people. I think that we have almost sort of overdone it in some ways on sort of the scalability and sort of, like measurement, I think, is the foundation. Measurement and creativity are not opposing forces. They need to complement each other. They need to go hand in hand. I think that, when you look at some of the great ads in history that sort of really resonated, how many of them were from the last 5 years? Very, I'm gonna go out on a limb, but like I would say that, we need to kind of get back to great marketing, great brand building, measured in a way that we can understand, so we know that the money goes to the right sort of sources. But it's not, just about like everything you can't put a number to everything, and I think that's something you learn over time in life, that there is a part of it where you just need to kind of put your hand on the like, does it feel right? Does it resonate? And I think that the combination of human machine, of a bit like data intelligence and instinct, all of it has a role to play, and I think that's what we should take to heart.
Music to my ears to hear someone who you said, like, co-founded the environment of e-commerce and discounted promotions, telling me that brand building is very, very important. I love speaking to the converted. So what changed your mind?
I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure if my mind, my mind was like, I think it's more that my view of sort of, if we use the term strategy, it's not like, strategy is not a static thing. It's a living being that has to evolve with its context. And like the thing is that when you look at, I rarely use the term a right strategy or a wrong strategy. The question is it relevant for its context and what we're trying to achieve? And that's going to evolve over time. And the hardest thing that I find, which is more like a bit of a leadership reflection, to change a winning formula is extremely difficult. It's one of the hardest things there is, because you have to kind of, you have new comparables, you have sort of this, you need to all of a sudden like, yeah, but why should we change doing what we are doing? But I think when it comes to sort of this discussion of promotions versus, if it's versus marketing and what have you, but I don't think I can find a more sort of case in point for where this is so true, that what got us here was there for a reason, but it's not going to get us where we need to go. And I think that what you will see if we continue, which is a possible scenario, we're gonna see many brands being knocked out. I think that we will sort of just see underinvestment in brand building and sort of connecting to consumers and users.
I love what you said, and I just want to commend that, where it is such a humble or wise thing to kind of accept that what your winning formula was in the past might not be your winning formula moving forward, because the world is changing today and the playbook needs to change. And I want to pick up on something you said earlier. I'd love for you to elaborate on. You said launching a brand is easy, sustaining a brand is not so easy. Is that harder to do now than before? And can you speak to some of the changing landscapes of why we need to take a different strategic choice?
I think it's a very good question. And like, first of all, if you just look at the quantum of brands, if you take, Indonesia, our largest market around here, I saw some statistic that like there are over 60,000 brands being launched in the country every year, but almost as many disappear from the market as well, right? And I think that when it comes to sort of brand building, I hate to sort of be old-fashioned about it, but I think we need to recognize that it takes time to build a good brand. It's something that needs to be sustained. It needs to be compounded. But the thing is, like, when we look at sort of, because there is a little bit also this sense of like what gets measured gets kind of done, right? And to look at your customer base, that if you compare it to the evolution of e-commerce, I said earlier that we had a penetration, new customer acquisition. A brand life cycle is not all that different. Early on, it's about how do we acquire customers? How do we sort of build that following? How do we build that, if you will, fan base or community or what have you? But over time also, of course, how do they behave? Do they refer others? Do they, how much or how big share of our sales come from referring customers? How much of it comes from returning customers and so forth? And this will differ if you're in cosmetics, or if you are in I don't know, be it fashion or something more sort of high value goods that are less frequent. So the strategies may differ, but what I do think is so crucial is that we are in a community based world. People do look at the experience of other users to a higher extent than probably ever before in history, and sort of when you look at the Asian mind, if you will, we trust the people around us. We trust our family. We trust sort of the extended family. We trust, again, I keep using the word community, but it's so fundamental to understand that you can't sort of just rush past it. And something that I kind of revolt a bit against, especially sort of in the last, year and a bit, where it's like even more fashionable, like everything should grow very quickly. I said in another setting last week that, these $100 million ARR companies, we're going to laugh at that in not too distant future, because that's not how it works. To build quality takes time. And that is true for a company, that is true for a brand, that is true for every relationship, which a brand is a relationship. It's a relationship to a customer. And it needs investment, it needs taking care of. It needs to be evaluated, and you need to sort of have a good data foundation and framework to support it. But again, like the patience and the compounding, it will pay off. And this is sort of where some of these just hard-earned truths, like it's some of these things that you know it when you see it and when you have experienced it. It's very hard to take in when someone tells it to you, but I still think it's the truth.
If you're listening to this podcast, you'll know that WARC is the home of leading effectiveness thinking. And now we're teaching you everything you need to know about the fundamentals of strategy. WARC Strategy Fundamentals is our new digital course for junior or entry-level strategists. You'll learn from award-winning case studies and hear directly from top strategists and WARC's own experts, giving you the latest industry insights alongside proven practical frameworks. Sharpen up your skills to excel in 2026 with WARC Strategy Fundamentals. Available now at warc.com/learning.
You touched on one of my favorite topics this year, which is about speed. So at WARC, one of the things that we're championing is investing in brand building and creating the local case for that. Or how do you create the local language for that? And one of the things that I hear a lot from my peers is like, oh, the excuse that Asia moves too fast for brand building to work. Because to your point,
Interesting point.
brand building takes time. So I'm curious, someone who's actually in e-commerce where things move really fast, and to hear you talking about brand building takes time. What do you think of that statement? It's not true, by the way, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, I think it's an interesting reflection, and like that Asia moves fast. I think I wouldn't dismiss that. I think it's true, and I think it's also, again, this dynamic that, the share of, if you talk about brands and consumer brands at least, the share on offline retail, it does determine the pace, because the offline retail shelf is physical, it's set, it changes slower. And then again, the share of online definitely accelerates the pace. But what I would sort of challenge a bit is the premise that great brands cannot be built in the online context and sort of build staying power in the online context. I think when you look at sort of the loyalty that you can build, I think it's more that you need I actually really like this question, because I think it's completely wrong. it's like totally wrong. Like it's just because I think they are making a diagnosis that brands fall off the market quickly. True. They are sort of picking up on that Asian consumers change their preferences. Also true. But what I think they are missing is kind of why, and they're also missing sort of what are the brands that are winning. What are they doing right? And I think this is again where, I personally, like, as much as I'm European, I am in Singapore is my home. I think China is a fascinating place, with its pros and cons and everything else, same as every place in the world. But from a learning perspective, for me, it's like going to the gym. You just you get better because you have to be on your toes, and you have to just level up yourself. And when you look at something like Xiaohongshu, like the little red book, which is sort of this, it's not a Pinterest, but it's kind of where consumers go to get to sort of pick up on what are other people thinking, what's trending, what's happening. Like, brands who really understand their consumers, who understands that the preference for ingredients in products are changing, who understands that sort of the way a brand is positioning itself has changed. I think the faster you recognize that, especially if you are sort of a big FMCG company or whatever else, the better off you will be. Because the fact that see change in Asia and the speed of change in Asia as a leading indicator for what you need to do, not for something that you should just back away from. And like, when I see sort of certain large FMCG companies that give up on markets because it's too difficult sorry for you, like, I can't sort of, if you everyone makes their own choices, but just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't face up to it.
I'm so glad that you believe it's wrong, because we also believe it wrong, which is that myth that we've been trying to bust this year. I'll tell you one of the key findings from there, which is do not conflate operational speed with the need to invest in brand building and assume that market changes are going to kind of dilute that. Does that kind of like capture some of the things?
Yeah, no, I would say so, right? And like, I mean, there are certain things where I think people almost need to kind of see it for themselves to fully internalize it. I actually like what you said, like with operational speed versus sort of the brand and so forth, right? And like, Asia works hard and moves fast. That's just how it is. And I don't think there's anything that's going to change that. And if you look at sort of the supply chain turnaround times, like, I mean, I'm Swedish, so we have, we grew up with H&M and so forth, right? They're like planning in seasons and for 2 years ahead. Here, trends turn literally in a week or maybe 10 days. But the part which is sort of, it's in no conflict with the fact that how does a brand stand out? How does it connect? How does it sort of ingrain itself in the community? And like, some of this is also, of course, down to other changes in society. If you look at the last decade and a bit, Korean beauty has been a defining factor. I mean, K-beauty and the whole cultural zeitgeist around that. It's not that it's sort of declining or decreasing, but now there is this other thing, which is sea beauty, which is Chinese beauty. And when you look at sort of Chinese beauty brands that are now entering, for example, as we saw recently in Thailand, is one of the most sort of trending things on TikTok. Thailand is a 65 million people market, or whatever, population-wise at least, right? And you have new brands that sort of come up with a new narrative, a new story, a new connectivity, where you again combine product offering, channel mix, and sort of the whole package. Because it's not just product. It is, I mean, it's kind of back to what they taught you in uni, right? Like the four P's, right? It's still true. It's just because it's different pricing strategy, it's different, promotional logic, and where you go to market and whatnot. Like, it's still there. It hasn't changed. People are remarkably, the same as yeah.
How do we then make the case for more brands to kind of invest what you're talking about? And I'd love to hear, maybe explain it in maybe more financial terms, for example, because the other thing is usually, oh yeah, brand building is fluffy, but we know at WARC that actually including brand building actually supercharges your performance in the short term and the long term.
I think for sure. So let's just break it down. That what's happened with if you take e-commerce as sort of a starting point, right? The way, especially online advertising, I'm not talking about marketing, I'm just going to use the word advertising, has evolved, is that it's become like a tax on the gross margin. Where basically, if you want to sell, you have to basically pay anywhere between 5 to 25% in just advertising fee to be visible. That's sort of what has happened, and that is tax collected by Google, by Meta, by the e-commerce platforms themselves. And for anyone who is a CFO or whatever, whoever looks at the financial metrics, they know that. It's not like they don't see it. And what's really interesting is that we always tell the story. We advertise early and then the cost goes down. It never happens. It just stays up there. Because if we focus on transactional or promotional driven advertising, because people, they always like, the thing is this, there are so many bad leaders what bad leaders do is that they only look at numbers because that's what they feel comfortable with, and they feel that, okay, I'm covered because it's true in the numbers. And what you end up with then is that you keep doing the same thing. It's the same promotional problem, and like you have this tax on your revenue, which means that the only thing that will happen is that your profits will go down over time. Now, what brand building does is that it structurally over time lowers your customer acquisition cost. It increases your loyalty. It really makes it possible to build a long-term relationship with your users and customers that regular, be it promotional or sort of transaction-based advertising, will ever do. And I do think that when it comes to sort of how we evaluate, how we measure, because there is always like, in some ways, I think that measurement can't take over completely either. It really needs to be this sort of duality in it, right? And like, I can say that some of the brightest people I have had a chance to work with and deal with, they know this. They know that, we can't measure everything and we can't put a number to it. You have to believe in something. Like, if you are a CEO or a business leader and you have no beliefs, then go home. Like, there's no point. Like, you have to believe in something and say, this is what I think is right. And like, the thing is that you will have companies that I think you can't convince. You can't convince them because they are so set in their ways. They sort of have a certain way to approach it. And, to be honest, like, I'm kind of less and less, I spend time trying to convince people. I'm more like, you do you. You do. Because like, what are you gonna do? Like, there are so many people who get it, and there are some who quite frankly don't. And I think there's also a confluence here, right? That the Western companies are larger. They are more sort of set in their ways. They are more corporate. They have more clear frameworks, and sort of you submit your Excel sheets and your business cases and what have you. There is a dynamism in Asian businesses where you put a much higher sort of index on what does leaders believe in, what do we think is right, what does history tell us, and I think this is a structural competitive advantage for Asian businesses. It's hard to just sort of tell someone who is like, yeah, but where does it show up in the spreadsheet? It does not. That's the point. It does not. Like, we can measure some things. We can definitely pick up on some things. We need to do better. We need to do more. But there are also some things that, quite frankly, comes down to judgment, accumulation of knowledge over time. And again, you got to believe in something. Otherwise,
I mean, I'm glad that we're talking about leadership here, because when I try and evangelize this message, the pause that I always give is, we are at it's unforgiving out there, right? So much change. And I think as a leader, you're faced with this question about, do I do more of the same, or do I do something differently so that I can get to better outcomes? So I know you said that you do you and you don't convince, but I think a lot of people who are listening will
I
hear
recognize
you.
that. Yeah.
So what needs to change? Is it structurally? Is it culturally?
The one thing I would sort of probably do, we need to separate conversion rate from marketing, in the sense that we have gotten very excited about how do we measure, like the full funnel end to end, and sort of how can we stitch everything together to optimize it and attribute everything. And like, I think that's just gonna take us down the wrong path, because the problem with conversion rate is that it's a collection of everything that happens, online, offline, through different channels. Like, and yes, we will always, including, some of our partners, they will be saying that, we have a new model that's going to measure it better. It's not a perfect science, but if we sort of look at what are the different, goals that we actually want to get to, and if that is sort of even back to sort of some of the older ways with like what's not just top of mind for a customer, but like, I think that we need to kind of look at brand metrics over time. The problem is that I think that brand building in the online context, I think we can do better in terms of sort of what, how we look at the data that surrounds brand building in the online context, because some of the offline methodologies, they simply don't square in the online context. But that's sort of where, measurement needs to get better. But also, again, you need to have that fundamental belief that brand strength has incredible financial returns. There is no question about that.
Fantastic. One last question for you. We're towards the end of this year, so which means that everyone's putting their future hat, right?
Yes.
You've been in e-commerce for a long time. You helped pioneer it here in the region. What do you hope the next 10 years, looks like? The first decade you said was 11/11,
Yeah.
cashback, etc. Where would you like to? Where would you like us to get to in the 10 years?
I mean, I think that the part that I really both believe and hope that we will see is the evolution of homegrown brands. I think it's something that I really believe is important for the long term. I think like that you will definitely see, a continued change in the platform landscape. Platforms will grow, they will decline. You will see new ways of engaging, where it's probably going to be that there will be a platform out there that has no front end, that is only a data backend that models talk to. All of this will probably play out. It will take longer than we think, but it will definitely play out. But I really hope and believe that each of the countries in our region, as well as rest of Asia, will continue to and sort of both start and continue to develop homegrown brands. I think this is something that it's good for the market. It's relevant for consumers, and if it's something that we have learned this year, is that trade is best when it's a little bit balanced, I think is fair to say. And go to China. China is a massive market. I will put that as a plug in the end, that China is, I think, is a it's huge, and there's so much to learn. There are so many consumers to reach, and I think that it continues to fascinate me.
I mean, I always say that as well. If you want to understand the future, go look at China and just be a curious explorer. And that is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Magnus, for your insights and your candidness.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Go on WARC.com if you want to find out more about the PACE principle, brand building in Asia. Thank you so much.